Hello, everyone. Uh, titled this talk Macro Group Identities. And this does go a little bit further with something we looked at last week, which you recall at the kind of base, we had the state and then regime, and then above that, government. So the most institutionalized, most fundamental identity would be the state, and that will be where we'll go toward the end of this. But I'm going to look at some other macro group identities first, meaning groups that someone would identify with and define themselves by. Okay, so first we're going to look at the idea of society. What do we mean by society? Well, society, like it says there, it's a broad term that refers to complex human organization, a collection of people bound by shared institutions that define how human relations should be conducted. And I have a couple images there. Some of you guys may recognize the one on the left of Christopher McCandless. He is the focal character, and he's a real person whose story was recounted in first the book Into the Wild, and then was later made into a movie, Into the Wild. So we would say that Christopher McCandless essentially left society. He didn't leave the state. He moved around the U.S. for a while, then he wound up in Alaska, but he detached himself from social connections, and so he was trying to kind of do life on his own and see what he could find out about what life really was. And doing that, it's a fascinating movie. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend it, but it's it explores some interesting things. I even actually wrote a poem about it. If anyone happens to bring that up later, then you may be able to hold me to reading that for you. But I'm not going to do it right now. Okay, and then on the right side, we have an image of a church, and obviously those people all together saying, hey, we are the church. We, the collection of people who are here, the relationships that we form as a result of that, we form a type of society. Normally, when we talk about society kind of on a broad basis, we mean, of course, just on a bigger scale than that, but there is a sense of a society here. It's a collection of people. Their shared institution is the church, and that defines all sorts of ways about how you ought to live if you interact with one another when you're in that body. Okay, each country views itself and the wider world around it in a distinct way. So each country then is creating its own society, and then those societies can interact with each other in different ways. Not sure why it's not letting me advance using the keyboard, so sorry the mouse keeps popping up there, but that's what I'm going to be doing. Okay, so ethnic identity and ethnicity. So if you have society as kind of the backdrop that people live under, then within that they form their own individual identities. But those identities, it's not like every person is just, we'd say, like a unicorn, like that they're solitary and just one of a kind, right? Yes, we're all individuals. We all are different from each other, but we also have groups that we connect with. And the first of these is an ethnic identity or ethnicity. And obviously, there's a number of bullet points there. And I suppose I can read through them, but I may interject some things here. So, the emphasis is on a person's relation to other members of society, and it's a set of institutions that bind people together through a common culture. You are born into your ethnic identity, therefore, it is ascriptive. And that means it's essentially like ascribed or kind of assigned to you at birth. You can't get away from it. It's not something you choose, such as later in life where you may say, well, I want to be a Christian, or I want to be a Democrat or a Republican, something political, right? These are identities that involve choice. But a scriptive identity, your ethnic identity, is just what you're born with, right? So my grandfather was born to two Greek parents, so he has that ethnic identity of being Greek. And then my mom, well, my grandfather married a non-Greek woman, so now my mom is like half Greek. And like it says at its core, because of these things, it's a social, not a political identity. There's nothing specific that I can really learn by saying, oh, that person is Greek, therefore they must believe these political ideals. I might be able to make some kind of assumptions, conclusions, according to if I study Greek people, what they tend to be like. But you could have any variety of opinions and still hold that ethnic identity that's been assigned to you or ascribed to you at birth. Also, there is no master list of differences that define a group as ethnically different from another. So you have in Bosnia, you have these three different groups: Croats, Serbs, and Muslims. They all speak the same language, and they're similar in some other ways, but they're divided by religion. And with those religious differences, we tend to call these three different ethnicities that are present in Bosnia. So maybe you might start thinking, oh, okay, so ethnicity is tied with your religion, your worldview, or something like that. However, when you look at a place like Germany, well, we say Germans are a single ethnic group. And however, within Germany, some people are Catholic and some are Protestant. So obviously this starts to confuse things where we say, well, wait a second, I really want to know, tell me clearly what an ethnic identity is. And the truth is, well, it is tough to define, but that doesn't mean it's meaningless. And here's what we really mean. This is a case where the meaning that is invested into ethnic identities can result in powerful effects. Meaning, although it is something I'm kind of born into, I nevertheless, when I embrace that, it becomes a powerful part of who I am. And so the key here in terms of defining ethnic identity versus what we're going to see in these next ones is that it is something you're born into and it involves kind of your heritage. And normally, yeah, you could think of like tribal groups and these sorts of things. So yeah, your group identity defined, you could say, by your genes. Okay, so next up we have the idea of a nation. And this will be somewhat similar to an ethnic identity, but with some important differences. And in this case, you have a group that desires self-government through an independent state. So notice this is a political aspiration. An ethnic identity, don't necessarily have that. You have people who maybe are kind of just bound together by their love of maybe similar dance or food or customs. And it's this, genetic ties to that for that person to other people. Here we have a political aspiration. And therefore, because we have that kind of defined sense of this political aspiration tied to what is a nation or a national identity, this is pretty much consistent from case to case. Remember, cases we mean comparing different countries, different places. And unlike ethnic identity, like I kind of hinted at before, or maybe said, it is inherently political. If you have a national identity, it is politically defined as well. And so, with this political identity, this can create nationalism, a pride in one's people and the belief in their own sovereign political destiny that is separate from others. Nationalism is something that kind of gets a bad rap a lot of the time. People associate it with something like fascist or Nazi Germany or fascist Italy, places where it became this very ultra nationalist sense that created a strong sense of superiority versus other people, right? But nationalism doesn't necessarily need to embrace this idea of superiority, but it does say, hey, we're a unique people. We want to define ourselves as unique people and to be recognized as a unique people. And so then there's kind of some thought questions you could ponder. We might explore those together later, which is why have Peru and Bolivia succeeded in creating national identities while many Quebecois, meaning people from Quebec, continue to support independence? And then you can see that there can potentially be costs to a loss of national pride or national identity. Germany and Japan have seen these things diminish. And then the question is that hazardous for the health of their country? Do you need some degree of pride in who you are as a people to kind of continue to function and celebrate who you are and have a belief that your country matters and your nation matters? Okay. I had a quote here from a guy. He's a scholar named Benedict Anderson, and this comes from his most famous book, which is called Imagined Communities. I guess I may show that on the next slide. But he says, this fraternity makes it possible for so many millions of people not so much to kill as willingly to die for such limited imaginings. And so this is kind of this odd thing where I commit myself to a community, such as Maybe if I am, well, I'm American, so maybe to the American people. If you are, let's say, Chinese, to the Chinese people. A billion people out there, you're never going to know pretty much any of them, right? You know, just your small little pocket from your little village or town. It doesn't make sense to be so fiercely devoted to a quote community in which you cannot know the great majority of the members. Why or why not? So why am I standing up for this thing and fighting for it? Okay, and that said, there is a bit of a distinction between nationalism and then therefore national identity and a final category, which is citizenship. So ethnic identity is pride of your ethnicity, identity according to your ethnicity. Nationalism identifies with your nation. But notice, by the way, that national identity, it might not be a nation that has achieved the status of a state. So, for example, Palestinians, they consider themselves a nation. They are pursuing an agenda of wanting their own state, but they don't have it yet. You know, who's to say if they will get it? But they nevertheless are a people with political aspirations. So therefore, they are they have nationalism. What we'll see is they don't have patriotism, because patriotism is tied to citizenship. So here at the top, citizenship is an individual's or group's relationship to the state. The defining characteristics that you want to look for here with citizenship is the idea of relationship, particularly like a contract relationship. So notice the subpoints there. In exchange for allegiance to the state is obligated to provide rights to those individuals or the members of that group. And so with that kind of exchange, this can convey certain obligations on the individual, on the member of that state. So they might have to pay taxes, military service, maybe some kind of civil service, anything that is considered that you are responsible to owe the state as a trade-off or exchange as being a part of it. This relationship that is fostered and formed between an individual and the state that he is part of, the political entity he is part of, can produce patriotism or pride in one's state. And this is seen when people have pride in their political system and seek to defend and promote it. So, like in the US, people have pride in the Constitution and some of the amendments, right? And they say, these are who we are, they are what we stand for, and I'm proud of that. So I will stick my neck out for them. It might be tough to conceive of U.S., quote, nationalism, but not patriotism. And honestly, in everyday usage, these lines can be blurred, but ordinarily we do kind of think of a nationalism as more tied to a people that are kind of, honestly, nationalism is very often built on ethnic identity. It's just that not, so generally where you see nationalism, you see ethnic identity that it has kind of grown into that, but not all ethnic identities actually do grow into nationalism with this political agenda, right? So yeah, so these things are tough to define, but I would just say in terms of thinking, well, what's the difference between nationalism and citizenship? The key difference here would be citizenship is going to be defined by that contractual relationship, a give and take, saying, okay, here's what I will give the state in exchange for the benefits from the state. Nationalism is going to be this aspiration, especially for independence. Okay. And so finally, how did American identity come about? Well, it was forged in conflict with a common enemy. One comes to recognize commonality with others in contrast with someone else, and then shared values and beliefs. So you could say this is kind of the formation of a people and therefore a national identity, but it's very clearly becomes patriotism, a defense of the institutions, the practices, the state itself, the government, and all those sorts of things, the apparatus on which the society functions. Okay, and it can lead to this type of patriotism. And I won't sing it, but you can make me sing it. This is a famous Lee Greenwood song. It's kind of hyper patriotic, but I enjoy it. I like it. Anyway, I'll see you all soon. Feel free to come with questions. I know these aren't easy categories to kind of define, but hopefully this is a helpful introduction.